Welcome to This Week in Missouri Politics. The campaign season's underway. We're going to talk policy this week, however, with former United States Senator Jim Talent. Senator Talent, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Scott. It's great to be here.
Let's talk right off the top. This is one of those issues that hits pop culture, politics, and even now foreign policy. The NBA has become the very forward spokesman. I think their league encourages this to speak out on social matters.
Right.
They go to Hong Kong, expanding into China. They expanded China. There's a Hong Kong issue. They've talked about every possible social issue, every political issue you can imagine. Then in Hong Kong, the NBA goes silent. You're an NBA fan. That might surprise a few folks.
I'm a huge NBA fan.
Tell me your position as an NBA fan of what happened.
Well, look, I think we can take it as a given. Everybody agrees that the NBA at every level has bungled this so far, about as far as you can bungle it. I mean, and it's hard to deal with Beijing. Let's be fair, okay?
This started with a tweet from an executive with the Houston Rockets who had Yao Ming, so there is some. But the Chinese government took this one random tweet and made this international incident out of it.
Yeah. And they bungled it. In fact, you'd have had to plan to bungle it as badly as they bungled it, okay? But what I don't like about this is I don't like the fact that the NBA, particularly the players of the NBA, they don't have to let Beijing push them around like this. They're not like a private company like Marriott or Cathay Pacific or Audi that Beijing can push around and all the cloud is on the side of the Chinese Communist Party. These players are some of the most recognizable, popular people in the world. And the Chinese Beijing is full of authoritarians who have to spend enormous time and effort repressing their people, and they don't feel very secure. Well, I'd like to see these players do. I mean, a lot of these guys grew up in the street, not all of them. What do they do when they faced a bully? LeBron ought to get Durant and Kyrie and some of the retired guys together and tell Adam Silver to back channel Beijing and say, okay, we've had enough, okay? You don't like free speech? You don't want to play our games? You don't want to sell our sneakers? You don't want to keep your commitments to us? Fine. You're going to get some free speech, okay? Because we're going to start tweeting every night about Hong Kong. We're going to wear free Hong Kong T-shirts at the games.
That would take courage. I think the definition, it does not take courage if you're an NBA player, if you're an actor, if you're a singer, to say Donald Trump's the devil and he's the worst. That takes no courage. Everyone in your world will embrace you and compliment you. It takes courage to do something that people won't accept. LeBron James would like to sell sneakers. He'd like to sell Space Jam 2 in China. It would take courage to do that. And that's the missing element.
Well, and see, this is why I think it does bother me when people are letting themselves get pushed around when they don't have to. I don't really think it takes that much courage. I think they'll sell more sneakers. I don't think the Chinese will cut off their sneaker sales. What if they say to them, look, you know, the Olympics are next year, and all the big stars are playing in the Olympics. We skipped the last one, okay? So if you want to do this to us, we'll just walk around the Olympic Village saying, with T-shirts saying, free Hong Kong, and the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province, and the Tibetans. In fact, let all the people go. I don't think Beijing can take that.
I think it was a seminal moment for Americans, young Americans, who have been more politically active than the last few generations of younger Americans, to watch the NBA players go to Hong Kong and say on the shores of America, we're not going to just shut up and dribble. Right. And I think a lot of times when they speak out about social issues, about police issues, they have a very good point. They have some logic. These are not just athletes that aren't thinking people. They have serious opinions. They say, we're not going to shut up and dribble. They land in communist China. A CNN reporter stands up to ask them a question, and they shut up and dribble.
They're afraid, and there's no reason for them to do it. They've got some fang. They've got clout, and they ought to show it. They'll come up ahead in money.
Yeah.
But look, you're right. Even if
you would have more credibility to speak out on police brutality if you were LeBron James.
Absolutely.
You would have so much more credibility on issues that you care about if you were consistent in your passion, if you were consistent in your values.
It would strengthen their whole brand. Yes. They'd go from being, really good athletes who make a lot of money to almost athletes who cross the line and transcend to almost historic figures like a Muhammad Ali. Yeah. Now, I don't agree with a lot of their positions that they take, okay?
Sure.
But since I do appreciate sincerity and passion and courage, but this is a situation where I don't think it actually takes that much courage. The amount of effort Beijing has to put into repressing its own people. They spend more money on their internal security apparatus than they spend on the military, and they spend a lot of money on the military. And I don't think the Great Firewall would stand up to this, because you would see millions of people around the world retweeting this. The effect on this in Hong Kong if these guys stood up for them and fought back, and so that what are they risking? The players, a little money, the short money, right? The short-term money. I think they make more money in the long term.
But there's a risk to it. There's far more risk to that than saying I'm not going to the White House, for which everybody in your world will praise you for and say that's wonderful.
You're right, because the downside if they don't do this is it explodes the brand that they've all been building.
The end of the woke era of the NBA.
They look like, I mean, what they are looking like right now is Class A, the biggest hypocrites in the world, right? And it's obviously making them uncomfortable. The other thing is they got to get up and look at themselves in the mirror in the morning. And
this situation seems simple watching at home. Full disclosure, not that much of an NBA fan you are. There is a situation going on in the world that is far more complex, and you wrote a column about it.
Very difficult.
And it's one of those columns that you have to read twice if you're from West Butler County to kind of get your head around. There was a big kerfuffle in this. This is the interesting part. You see this on the news that Trump betrayed the Kurds or something in Syria. To most even people that follow Missouri politics, I understand the nuance of that's not there. Give me the short version of the column you wrote. We'll have it up on the website.
Sure.
But how he talked about how the options the president had weren't simple.
The president used every option at his command to help the Kurds, short of sacrificing his own country's overriding national interest in the region. Okay, so for months, he was pressuring Erdogan not to do this. And as a matter of fact, you can make a pretty strong, I don't know this for certain, that it actually kept Erdogan from doing it for months, right? And then he's threatened the economic sanctions. So he's using the diplomatic tools, he's using the economic tools. What he's not going to do and can't do, and even his critics aren't suggesting, is that we use the military tool against Erdogan, who is, after all, a NATO ally.
Yeah.
There's an American air base, Incirlik Air Base, in Turkey. The last time I checked, we have some of the nukes there. Okay, you don't want to go to war against a country where you have an Air Force base.
Well, if you say Putin's the biggest threat, you have. Didn't Khrushchev pull out of Cuba to not have an air base in Turkey that could hurt the Soviet Union?
It's just, and it's impossible for Trump to have used the military tool, and therefore, if he'd threatened it, Erdogan would have known he was bluffing. And you can't threaten something of that.
Erdogan has not been a leader that cowered.
Right. And so I think Trump did everything he could. And I think this is a situation where what people have to understand is that this president and the last president have decided for 8 years that we're not going to get into a deepening military exercise in the Syrian civil war. I never criticized them for that, either Obama or Trump. I think it's certainly the right decision now, because the downside for us far outweighs the upside. If you're not going to get involved in a war that a bunch of other countries are fighting, you're not going to have the same influence in terms of what's happening on the ground. The influence in Syria rests with the people who are fighting there: Assad, Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and the Kurds to some extent. But short of that, Trump did everything he could do.
What would be the national interest in us in sending people from Chesterfield, sending people from Sedalia to fight over in Syria in their civil war?
Well, the interest we have there is that to continue to fight ISIS, to keep secure the prisoners we have, okay, and to prevent further instability. We don't want yet another internal conflict within the broader civil war, okay? And those are substantial interests, and Trump used the appropriate tools to try and protect them, okay? It's just that he didn't have, because we're not going to war in Syria, unless he changes that policy.
Yeah.
And if he did, by the way, I wouldn't fight the Turks. I'd fight our actual adversaries, which is Assad. Assad's butchered hundreds of thousands of his people. If we want to do something from a humanitarian point of view, and I'm not suggesting we should, that's who we ought to oppose.
It just feels like America does so much better internationally when we act in our own interest and don't cloud those interests.
Scott, I think the problem was people, because the New York Times reported that Trump had greenlighted this. He did not, and everybody's admitting, he didn't greenlight that. He opposed it. He did everything he could to talk Erdogan out of it, and so did everybody else in the government. I mean, Secretary Esper was talking about this. So it didn't work, because Erdogan believes his interests, Turkish interests, lie in not allowing the Kurds to set up a semi-autonomous enclave. I mean, that's what it comes down to.
While you're here, I have to ask you. You were in Congress during the last serious impeachment discussion of Bill Clinton. What is it like in that caucus room when you're having to make these decisions? What are the pressures that come to bear when you're sitting with your colleagues deciding, do we do this most severe punishment on the leader of the United States of America?
Well, you have to take into account first of all, what the Constitution says about high crimes and misdemeanors. There are crimes that presidents can commit that are not necessarily high crimes and misdemeanors, and that was the dispute there between the Republicans and the Democrats. Okay, and fair enough, by the way.
Sure.
There was a real question over it at that time. I don't know how you can commit a high crime and misdemeanor if you haven't committed a crime. You know what I'm saying? And I don't know how you can do that. I thought that Trump's exchange with Zelensky was very appropriate. I think what Trump was saying is, look, we're very concerned about Hunter Biden, among other things. We want to investigate that. And since it occurred in Ukraine, we expect as a partner, we expect your cooperation, which I think the administration was fully entitled to do. But in terms of sitting there, you have to think, what does the Constitution say, okay? What actually happened? And how can I preserve a zone of independent judgment in the midst of this incredible political firefight
So
that's
do you
going
go for
on?
a walk or something and
You
do you
really
talk to Brenda? When you really sat down and decided, what influenced your decision to vote yes?
When President Clinton lied to the federal grand jury, I said to myself, okay, he's the chief law enforcement officer of the United States. It was one thing to lie at the civil deposition. I probably could have taken that. But when you walk into even over a matter that I will agree did not arise out of a public issue, right? It was a personal matter. But I felt that was too much, okay? And this is to some degree a gut call. The key that they all have to try to do is to guard against making a decision for very narrow political reasons, okay? In other words, exercise some independent judgment. Try not to be swept along with the crowd on either side.
Sure.
And we'll see if they do that.
Senator Talent, thank you so much for joining us on This Week in Missouri Politics. I'm going to have you school me a little bit and try this NBA thing out.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's fun.
Thank you so much. We'll be right back. The Opinion Maker panel after this. Brittany Robbins joins the show. But first, go to showinmissouri.com. This week we're in Lincoln County, Missouri. It's not named for Abraham. It's not named for the general. It's actually named for a typo. Learn all about the history of Missouri one county at a time at showinmissouri.com. We'll be right back after this.
All across Missouri, our new car and truck dealers are building strong local economies. When you buy a car or truck in Missouri, you're helping to support over 20,000 Missouri families who rely on the auto industry for good-paying local jobs. You're also helping fund our communities, schools, first responders, and our roads because dealers generate millions of dollars in tax revenue. Missouri's automobile dealers have been the foundation of our communities for generations and for generations to come. The Missouri Automobile Dealers Association.
At Ameren, Missouri, we know what light can do. It draws people together and chases monsters away. And if you shine it in the right direction, it will light the path for the next generation, showing them what their tomorrow could look like and spotlighting the possibilities that lay in front of them. Investing in our community by lighting the way forward. That's energy at work. Ameren, Missouri.
Welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics. John Gaskin, friend of the show. Welcome back, sir.
Thanks for having me, as always.
Brittany Robbins, welcome back to This Week in Missouri Politics.
Good morning.
The largest donor to Rachel Prouty, Gregg Keller. Welcome back, sir.
Proud of it.
Nice. Joe Lakin, the best hair in Missouri Politics. Welcome back to the show, sir.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start off. Senator Talent came in hot on Hong Kong. You know, when you're going to have Senator Talent on, you're like, you know, he's very thoughtful, he's educated. What's going to be the real hot button topic? But I could tell when I met him this morning, it was the NBA in Hong Kong.
Yeah, no, look, I think it used to be as recently as 45 days ago that the most dangerous place in America was between an NBA player or executive and the microphone to talk about a current event and speak up. But either they've broken the microphones or their ankles. And, you know, a cynic would say that had something to do with the 1.3 billion citizens in China that maybe like to watch the NBA, but I'm not a cynic, so I don't think that's probably it.
Well, of course he's not a cynic. Brittany Robbins, I have to say, LeBron James on American soil says, I'm not just going to shut up and dribble. He makes some very fair, thoughtful points. Then he goes to China, where the human rights abuses are egregious, and he literally shuts up and dribbles.
Yeah, he's cartoonishly out of touch on this one. I like LeBron James. I usually think he's socially responsible and doing the right thing. But what's going on in Hong Kong is a homegrown organic fight for freedom, the right to speech, freedom of expression, and as Americans, we should be embracing and supporting that.
John Gaskin, you've been heavily involved in NAACP at different times in your career. I think some of the points NBA players make, they can probably feel personal. If you're an African American in the United States, you can speak to some of these issues from a personal vantage point. And I get how that anything that touches you personally is going to have more passion inspired in you than something across the Pacific Ocean. However, can you imagine the credibility that's been added to a LeBron James's arguments on those issues back here if he would have stood up for those same ideals over there?
Sure. I think the NBA needs to do a much better job at educating their constituency on what the issues are. Oftentimes with athletes, they will not speak up on anything, as we saw with Colin Kaepernick's situation, because they may not necessarily understand the issue entirely. With LeBron James, I would have hoped that he would have spoken up and used his benchmark to speak on this issue. Hopefully we can expect better from him in the future on these sorts of issues.
You know, it's interesting to me. We're not going to go to the White House. We're not going to. Donald Trump's awful. That takes absolutely zero courage if you're in the NBA, if you're an actor, if you're a singer. Your whole world applauds you. That takes zero courage to say something. If I go to West Butler County and say Donald Trump's the greatest president in the history of mankind, it takes no courage. Yep. Everyone agrees. Every single person except for maybe Art Cole's family agrees with me.
Yep.
They didn't show the same courage at all.
Democrat Party has always traditionally had problems standing up to leftist totalitarian regimes. That's been true for decades now. And I think it was legitimately brave of people like Cory Booker and other people who are running for president as Democrats who are actually socialists to stand up to a communist socialist government. I think that took a lot of courage, and I was pleased and surprised to see them do that.
Let's ask you this, though. What do you do to fix this? I mean, to me, there's a moment, I don't watch the NBA. I was surprised Senator Talent was a legit NBA fan and could discuss it far deeper than I even know existed. However, when that CNN reporter stands up and asks them a legitimate, non-aggressive question about the human rights abuses, and they're shouted down by the NBA, how do you move past that?
Well, I think the first thing you do as the NBA is you don't put out two different statements, one in English and then one in Chinese. One that seems to take a tougher line, and then one in Chinese asking for forgiveness from the Chinese government. That was the biggest and initial mistake that they made, was trying to have two different messages to two different constituencies that were written in starkly different language.
Brittany Robbins, you're a public relations professional. The NBA comes to you and says, how do we get people to forget that we just shouted down a reporter and literally told our players to shut up and dribble for money?
Yeah, the NBA is going to have to decide what's more important to them. Is it making money in that market, their advertisements, endorsements for the players and so forth, or is it standing up for freedom, democracy, and beliefs and values of Americans?
It just seems highly hypocritical to say we're going to push our players into this space and support them, and then we're going to tell them when there's money involved for us not to. I mean, I think that's either you should just come out and say, hey, we don't care about politics, we're just here for the money, which is totally defensible. I'm a capitalist myself. Or you say we're going to do these things, but you can't shout down reporters. I mean, that's a hard image to get out of your head.
Well, I think that's probably why you're seeing the reaction that you're seeing, is because the response was then to cancel games and take down advertisements and cancel endorsements and that sort of thing. It is coming down to the bottom line. There is a lot going on there with that.
Joe Lakin, I believe you're helping the Parson re-election effort in some form or other, correct?
Yeah, working for a PAC in support of the governor.
The battle lines are becoming drawn. Governor Parson versus Nicole Galloway. She had a good quarter, right?
Yeah, look, she raised some of the low-hanging fruit that you would expect from any Democrat to pick up early. But again, I go back to, you look at 2016, 2012, 2008 with Governor Nixon, Attorney General Nixon, then Governor Nixon's reelected Attorney General Koster. And the thing I look at, money is obviously always very important in a campaign, which the governor has significantly more than she does already. But the other thing is you have to have something to do with that money. You have to have a story to sell. And both Governor Nixon and Attorney General Koster had support from agriculture groups, had crossover appeal. I think the biggest thing she's going to find is she's going to run out of room, run out of voters to convince with the money she has, telling her story. She does not have crossover appeal that those two gentlemen had built over years. And to boot, you've got a situation where you have no primary on the Republican side, and you have a very popular governor. So I have trouble seeing how she does better than they did in a state that continually moves to the right.
John Gaskin, I actually think that in today's politics, Nicole Galloway maybe has some crossover appeal to some people that if you don't win, some folks, a lot of folks in Missouri that voted for Trump, you can't win anything. Mm-hmm. But I think there's the women that we're talking about, college-educated women from the suburbs, such as yourself from Chesterfield, who in large numbers, far more than a normal Republican, voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. You would think those voters might begin to take a half step back from him. seems like she would be the perfect candidate to pick up those voters.
Sure. I would, by no means would I ever write Nicole Galloway off. You know, never write her off. You look at what she's done in Boone County, you look at what she's done as a mother, you look at what she's done as a CPA in the auditor's office. She's ripping and running across the state. She had an excellent fundraising quarter. She's establishing some really key relationships across the state where it's going to take to pull some of those voters to have a successful gubernatorial run. I think that she's got a good campaign strategy, and you're going to be hearing a lot from her here in the coming weeks.
Brittany Robbins, when I see a hypothetical television ad of a black and white picture of Nicole Galloway and dun dun dun, she's awful, I'm like, no, she's not.
Yeah, so I think from a PR perspective, when you put Governor Parson and Auditor Galloway next to each other, there is something that is way more appealing about her. As far as preparation for the campaign trail and just those two being side by side, Governor Parson has some work to do.
But I also think when you put Governor Parson in a black and white photograph and it's like, dun dun dun, he's off, I'm like, no, he's not. He looks like my grandfather. He looks like Missouri's grandfather.
Yeah, he has a trusted face, that's for sure, and people are getting to know him. As the current governor. That being said, back to kind of what Joe was saying, I do think it's going to come down to numbers. While Nicole's put up some great numbers for her campaign committee, the differences in the PAC, Governor Parson is setting records.
It does look like she's going to have a fully funded campaign to run a very credible campaign for governor. I mean, she's going to hit her marks, and whatever that number is, it appears she's well on the way to actually raising what you need to do that. She's not going to outraise the sitting governor, but she's going to have a fully funded campaign.
I think both candidates are proving that they're going to run excellent campaigns. What it's going to come down to is the landscape of 2020 and just where Missouri is on the political spectrum.
Keller, you're doing some work to re-elect the governor, I assume?
A little bit, yeah. You know, I think in terms of the gender gap, I think that's going to be working against Democrats in a serious way, both nationally and in Missouri this year. We just had a bunch of polling back on every single statewide here in Missouri over the course of the last week. It showed every single Democrat losing to their Republican counterpart by double digits. Not only that, but when you look at the difference between the way women are voting and men are voting, of course, everyone wants to think, oh, suburban moms are going to turn out and elect Democrats all over the place. Well, you know what? Republicans are voting for men across Missouri by a larger number in all of these statewide races than Democrats are voting for women. I believe there's a very simple reason for that. I believe given where the National Democratic Party stands today, I don't believe that any self-respecting red-blooded male is going to vote for today's iteration of the Democratic Party.
You know, there was several decades of Republican candidates basically telling African-American voters, we're not after your vote. We're not interested in you. There's policies that you've expressed you care about, we don't care about. It really does feel like on some level, if you're a straight, white, Christian male, especially from the rural areas, Democrats aren't interested in your vote.
They hate you, and Americans have started taking that into account when they vote.
Let me ask you this, though. If you are making the pitch to elect Donald Trump, to some of those suburban women that are discussed as maybe the swing voters in Missouri, a college-educated suburban woman that voted for Trump by a larger statistic than probably most Republicans, what is the case you make to bring them back and keep them voting for you?
I think you talk to them about what the Democrat Party is saying they're going to do if they take over U.S. government. They're talking about tripling Americans' taxes. They're talking about tearing down our border walls. They're talking about the Green New Deal. They're talking about $90 trillion in increased government spending over a 10-year period. The federal government took in $3 trillion a year in individual tax receipts last year. They're talking about 3 times that every single year in increased government spending. I'm sorry, the Democratic Party has gone insane, and I don't think the people are going to be responding to that particular platform.
Let's talk about something locally. Joe, you've won a lot of House races in your day. There's a special election with a lot of this type of, the typical voter we've been discussing lives in St. Louis County. It's a competitive race. Both candidates have a lot of money. They're running hard. It looked like, the polling I saw, is whenever the impeachment talk happened, the Republicans got energized and that race got very tight, maybe even with a Republican advantage. Yeah,
look, I think you look back to 2018 for not too far back into 2018 with Kavanaugh, right? Mm-hmm. What the Democrats have done is, instead of going out and trying to win on policies, they focused on things like Kavanaugh, now impeachment, and they continually, at the worst possible time, continue to motivate voters. And that district is all about turnout. It's a special election. It's cliche, but it's true. And I do not understand why Democrats continue to poke these things, and on impeachment seemingly without a plan.
It does appear that the impeachment thing, I'm sure there's pockets in America where that's very popular. There's probably pockets in Missouri that's just very small pockets that's very popular. I just don't know how you sell that outside of those small pockets of very liberal voters.
So I appreciate the Republican talking points. I really do, fellas. But here's the deal. Impeachment should be looked at from the lens of the Constitution and patriotism and not partisanship. And I would love to know what the message would be if Hillary Clinton were elected.
The Republicans would say
and
impeach
let's
her.
say she was withholding money from Israel until they investigated her anticipated opponent in 2020 and was holding the G7 summit at a donor's, resort or compound next year. People's hair would be falling out and the National Guard would be on the streets.
I think if President Obama had the same narrative, there would be people calling for impeachment on the Republican side.
So you can't have it both ways. You just can't have it both ways.
What do you think? I do think that while it is the most serious, we saw Senator Talent discuss it when he was in the House. Sure. There's a political aspect to everything. It's just the fact of life.
Certainly. This week, Elijah Cummings passed away, and one of the things that he was going after, and I think we need to continue his legacy, is a level of transparency and accountability. Many Americans feel that what's going on in the White House is not okay. There's a lot of things that are taking place that are unethical, and I think there are a lot of unanswered questions. And let's follow the process in Congress and allow the results to take us where they take us.
Does Donald Trump really quickly run the risk of just having so many kind of bizarre things going on that people just in the back of their mind just start saying it's not worth it?
Well, let's remember a couple of things that the Democrat Party in the last couple of years has tried to impeach President Trump for. When he said things about NFL players who are not standing for the national anthem, 58 members,
comes to mind.
58 members, Democrats all, of the U.S. Congress voted to impeach this man because he said something not very nice about NFL players who refuse to stand for the for the national anthem. When he said something mean about the Squad, that's the straight up communist female members of the Democrat House, they tried to impeach him again for saying mean things about them. So I think the Democrat Party has a lot to do in shoring up their credibility on why this man should be impeached when they're trying to impeach him for the high crimes and misdemeanors of saying mean things about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Well, we no longer have time to say mean things, so Joe, with a minute left, who won the week?
I'd say Congresswoman Ann Wagner had a huge quarter and no opponent in sight. I think she's rocking and rolling in great shape.
Gregg Keller, who won the week?
Mike Parson. I think Nicole Galloway's in big trouble. She's tacked way far left and is not raising the kind of money she needs to.
Who won the week?
The late, great Senator Yvonne Wilson of Kansas City, tremendous public education advocate. We lost a giant this week.
Who won the week?
Ann Schweitzer, her older woman race is off to a huge start, and she's rocking it. So good luck to her.
Not a better intentioned person running for office than her.
Amen to that.
I am going to say Rachel Prouty. I think for a long time, Democrats may wonder about it. You have to compete. And to compete, you have to raise money, even from guys like Gregg Keller. I will be at the Stone County Pumpkin Day Hog Feed next week, so Brittany Robbins is going to take over the show. I have a feeling everybody on the panel should be far more worried about coming on next week than they were previous weeks. But we will see you next week, or I won't. You'll see Brittany next week on This Week in Missouri Politics.
This Week in Missouri Politics, sponsored by the Missouri Association of Career Fire Protection Districts, Spire, and Sterling Bank.